And while the road to Hollywood fame is rarely an easy one, what makes her journey particularly remarkable is that not only did she arrive in America without knowing a single word of English, but on the whole she struggled to fit in because everything about her, from the way she looked and dressed to her personal tastes and what she knew as the way of living, were completely different to the other school kids. If we pay attention to it, we probably wouldn't have to look that far to see hardworking immigrants who've made leaps and strides to not only improve their own life, but also bringing a noteworthy improvement to the world or at least the community around them through the work that they're doing. But when we take a look at celebrities or other well-known personalities, there's often a very well-documented insight into their life as it is now, either through various news and media channels, or at least some that you can get hold of from a quick Google search. And so it can become very easy to forget how it all started for them. Or possibly it's just something that we've never known about them to begin with. But something most people will probably agree on is the understanding that for most of these people, these successes didn't come overnight. And I know that can be debated now with the rise of social media allowing some users to gain hundreds and thousands of dedicated followers, probably within weeks. But I'm referring to fame and success stories in their more traditional sense. So in line with the purpose of this podcast, along with the guest interviews, I'll also be doing a weekly dive into the lives of famous personalities who are also immigrants. And I'm hoping that some of these will also be a surprise to you as much as they were to me. And with the vision of exploring whether there really is something to be said about having an immigrant mindset, I'll be breaking down the episode into the key takeaways that I've learned from their personal story, so that I can share these with you and hopefully provide a source of inspiration. And without further delay, today's episode begins with a name that we are no doubt all familiar with. Milena Markovna Kunis. Hopefully I haven't completely butchered that first name, but more commonly known as Mila Kunis, she is well recognized for her successes in Hollywood. And aside from me having a huge crush on her ever since that 70s show, she has also provided the voice of Meg Griffin in Family Guy ever since 1999 and has starred in a number of very successful films, including Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Black Swan, and Friends with Benefits. Actually, all of these being very good and very different films, so I'd highly recommend all of them. But to understand where it all began, for that we have to go back to 1983, where Mila was born to Jewish parents in the town of Chernvitsi in Ukraine. And so it turns out that her family history is wrought with tragedies related to religious persecution, including a lot of her family being in the Holocaust. And so to avoid the anti-Semitism that was occurring in the Soviet Union at the time, her parents, Mark and Alvira, saw very little future for Mila and her brother there, so that inspired them to decide to finally leave. However, even this took a lot of persuading, as they weren't going to leave without Mila's grandparents, and her grandfather in particular was involved in the Communist Party, and like many others, had a very strong loyalty to Russia, and as Mila puts it, he believed that Russia was the greatest country of all time. And in fact, it wasn't until Mila's father persuaded her grandfather to go and visit his brother who'd already moved to California that something finally changed.
He's able to visit his brother, he comes to the States, he goes to Disneyland, he sees a grocery store, he sees all things that America's known for, and comes back to what is now Ukraine and says, hey, I think we should probably start our paperwork to leave. So I think that it took my grandfather realizing the life outside of communist USSR back then in order to inspire my whole family to leave. 5 years later, we left on a religious visa.
And I found this next bit particularly eye-opening. When speaking about the stark differences in the way of life in the Soviet Union versus the US at the time, she added,
It's a funny concept. Like when you just look at the idea of Disneyland, that we back then didn't have McDonald's.
Right.
We didn't have a coffee shop. Like things that like people in the States don't realize as a luxury. Disneyland, the concept of Disneyland is a luxury. All it is there for you to have fun. Yes, you pay money, but your entire purpose there just to entertain yourself. That's a very foreign concept to a culture that doesn't have that or didn't have that.
However, even once they finally managed to move to LA, that was far from the end of their struggles. Her family definitely managed to find solace in the US, where they had a much more supportive stance for religious freedom, but the family really struggled in the beginning. And Mila was only 7 and found it especially difficult to integrate given that she couldn't speak or understand any English. Which brings me to lesson number 1, which is remaining resilient. Mila has since gone on to mention that the family arrived into the US with only $250. And this for me is where we really see the Kunis family embodying the immigrant hustle. Both Mila's parents gave up professional careers in order to make the move and were fully determined to provide a better life for their children. I've included a link in the description to an interview that she did with Glamour, where she was very open about what her parents went through, as well as all that they've done for her and the challenges that they faced. But to highlight some of the key messages, Mila told Glamour, "My parents went through hell and back. My parents for years worked full-time and went to college full-time. They would go to night school to learn English. My mum started work as a box lady, and that's what she did until she learned English. My dad worked 7 jobs." And on an interview for the Armchair Expert podcast, she was asked what was the one thing she picked up from her years of schooling, and her response? Resilience. Something that can unmistakably be seen as embodied by both of her parents. And while the road to Hollywood fame is rarely an easy one, what makes her journey particularly remarkable is that not only did she arrive in America without knowing a single word of English, but on the whole she struggled to fit in because everything about her, from the way she looked and dressed to her personal tastes and what she knew as the way of living, were completely different to the other school kids.
When I came to America in 91, I was ethnic. Mm-hmm. And to me, I was like, what? Why? Like, it was just everything about me stood out. I didn't speak the language. I wasn't blonde and blue eyes. I didn't eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It was like a very weird thing where I went to school in a uniform and I didn't know what jeans were. I mean, like, right. It's like simple, elements of life that you're like, how do you not know what jeans are? I didn't know what jeans were.
But for those of you that don't know, and one thing that I found truly amazing about Mila's story was just how her life in acting began. It turns out that in an effort to help her integrate more and meet other kids, her parents actually enrolled her in acting class at the age of 9 after her father had heard a radio advert for acting classes from Beverly Hills Studio. And it wasn't actually until about 5 years later that she got her break when she starred as none other than Jackie Burkhart, the young, self-absorbed, rich girl whose on and off love connection with Michael Kelso, the character played by Ashton Kutcher, made for one of the main plots of the great That 70s Show. Talking about this actually makes me want to watch it again, and just to make sure the theme tune gets etched into your mind for at least the next 24 hours, here is some of it. Boy, that really does bring back some memories. And if it's a show that you also watched growing up, I'd love to know who was your favourite character and why. So yeah, let me know in the comments section. So after some spot work as a host on some TV shows, she branched out into film, and her breakthrough came in 2008 for her performance in Forgetting Sarah Marshall, which, if you haven't seen it, it is very funny, and not just because it has Essex's very own Russell Brand.
You sound like you're from London. Yeah, I'm from London.
And 2 years later was probably when she really hit the limelight after receiving a Golden Globe and Screen Actors Guild Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress in Black Swan. Turns out that for the role she dropped 20 pounds and also trained non-stop for 7 weeks as a ballerina. But this is what she had to say about her ballerina skills.
The one attribute of learning to maybe fake ballet, I didn't become a ballerina. Right. It's not like I'm going to go and perform with New York City Ballet tomorrow. I can fake it fairly well. So, or I used to, not anymore.
And this brings me to the second key takeaway of her life, which was a consistent and genuine display of humility. Even though she'd had such an admirable level of success at such an early age with her roles in TV, it apparently wasn't until the age of 19 that she even felt she could turn this into a career-long profession. No matter how far Mila rises up the ladder, she never forgets what laid the foundation to help her get there. In a 2018 Woman of the Year press conference, in one of her answers, she said, "Your family ultimately never moves for themselves. They always move for their kids. I find that to be true probably for myself. You don't want to fail your family, and I think that's amplified when you're an immigrant." This kind of response really demonstrates how grounded she was, that even when she was picking up a Woman of the Year award, she still recognized how much none of it could have been possible without the sacrifices that her family made. And to what she mentioned at the end of that response, in a lot of cases, the sacrifice is made even more significant, given that it involves moving to a new country and having to immerse and start again in a completely unfamiliar environment where often the same language is not even spoken and so much was given up in order to be able to get there. And that brings me onto the third key takeaway, which is always acknowledging the sacrifices people made in order to help you get to where you are. When speaking about her parents, Mila said that they never wanted me to become an actress because it's such an unstable and unpredictable profession. When you're immigrants and you have to work hard for everything just to survive, it's only natural that you worry about having a stable job and income. But have a listen to what she goes on to say in this interview.
And you, at 9 years old, you announced, "I want to take an acting class," which was expensive. It was pricey. Was it $600-900, something like that?
Well, I always thought it was like $250, and my parents had like $900 in the bank account. And my mom and I were doing this interview, and not that long ago, I learned that it was $890, and we had $900 in the bank account.
And ever since she was 9 years old, even though her parents were naturally doubtful over the stability of a career like acting, especially given the financial stresses that they had, something they would have been well aware of is that to chase a passion often means taking some levels of risk. And so they never actively discouraged her from pursuing what she wanted to do.
At 9 years old, they were like, "This is your decision. If this is what you want to do, you go meet with all these people and you decide who you want to go with, and this is going to be your responsibility." And I was like, I want to do this.
Yeah. And in a further show of respect, she goes on to say, "I never missed out on anything. My parents did a beautiful job in not making me feel like I was lesser than any other kids." To help people better understand immigrants in the US, ABC's Fresh Off the Boat teamed with the 6-Word Memoirs book series to produce a collection of stories from people sharing their experiences with immigration in just 6 words. Several celebrities contributed, Mila Kunis being one of them, and her 6 words? A better life for our children. This just exemplifies the immense appreciation that Mila has for the sacrifices her parents made so that her and her brother could have this brighter future. And now Mila is not just returning the favor to them, but she is also embedding these values instilled by her parents to provide the same for her 2 children. In fact, this family-first approach is really highlighted in an agreement that she has made with Ashton, where they said they would never separate the family. And so Mila has since committed to only doing 1 movie a year so that it doesn't become at the sacrifice of the time for her kids and her family. But something that is key to note that helped Mila shape this strength of character is what she describes as the inclusive struggle.
It wasn't like the struggle of my family was like shielded from me. It's not like I wasn't aware of how poor we were.
Right.
It was like inclusive struggle. Like we are going to get through this together.
Yes.
Like we are doing this as a group. We are a family, and my parents protected my brother and I, don't get me wrong, but to a certain extent you're like, oh, wait a second, we're really poor.
Yeah.
And so when you kind of rise from that as a group, I don't think you could ever take that away from the family. We have a very small family.
And lastly, the final key takeaway from what can be learned from Mila's immigrant story is don't forget where you came from. Actually, I'm going to change that one slightly to actually give more credit to where it's due for Mila Kunis. So I'm going to rephrase that to stand up and speak out for where you came from. Now, this doesn't have to mean geographically where you came from. And in fact, in this case, it was about Mila standing up and speaking out as being one of those people who came from abroad to settle in the US. And these were the people who became a major target following Trump's election. And back to the point of standing up and speaking out, I think this becomes even more important the larger your sphere of influence is. I know it's a cheesy line used in a Spider-Man movie, but with great power comes great responsibility does carry a lot of weight behind it. And after Donald Trump's anti-refugee rhetoric, and I don't want to put too much emphasis on Trump because, well, he's had plenty of that for years now anyway, But some of you, I'm sure, will remember his very extreme and polarizing words, where he told his audience that he would have absolutely no problem looking Syrian children in the face and telling them to leave. Mila Kunis was quick to ridicule Trump by saying that she has her own experience of being an immigrant and does not fit into his damning stereotypes. In the same interview with Glamour, she added that we came here on a religious refugee visa, and I'm not going to blow this country up. I'm not taking anything away. Mila Kunis also had the courage. Well, I wouldn't even call it courage, just a passion for getting the message across, highlighting that it isn't solely Trump that's to blame, but America as a whole. What these strong words demonstrate to me is while she no doubt has a great appreciation for the opportunities that America has provided, not just for her but her family as well, she not only remains grounded to her roots, but being from an immigrant family herself, she is willing to take a public stance in support of all of those who have been on their own immigrant journey to find their way to the US. So that's going to wrap up the episode, guys, and just to recap on the 4 key takeaways from Mila's personal life journey that really represent the immigrant mindset is number 1, to always have genuine humility, no matter what your level of success ends up being. And number 2, remaining resilient, because the desire to succeed is even more significant when you're not just doing it for yourself, but for your family too, and knowing the immense sacrifice that was taken to be able to get this opportunity. Number 3 is acknowledging the people and what they've done that has allowed you to get to where you are today. And number 4, last and certainly not least, it's to stand up and speak out for where you came from. Do let me know if you agree with these, or if you have any other views on what I spoke about throughout the episode. You can do so by leaving me a comment on whichever platform you're using, or you can find me on Instagram at The Journey Onwards Podcast. If you did like the episode, then please do share it with others who you feel would gain the same too. I will of course be taking on board and replying to all of your comments personally to make sure that this podcast is constantly delivering the best insights and entertainment to you, and serves its intention to open up the world to what the immigrant mindset really is. Thanks for listening in, and I'll see you at the next one.